Members, the chair calls the Education Finance Committee to order for Thursday, March 6, 2025. Before we actually get within the bookends of the committee so that we can applaud, I am going to call out and welcome the Minnesota Coalition of Licensed Social Workers. I tried to meet as many of you as I could. So from the National Association of Social Workers, the Minnesota chapter, Minnesota Social Workers Association, Society of Clinical Social Work, Hmong Social Workers Coalition, Association of Black Social Workers, Nursing Home Social Workers Association. I hope I got all those right. Please stand up so we can give you a nice round of applause. So welcome and thanks for joining our committee. With that, members, Ms. Bolka, we do have a quorum present. A quorum is present. And Representative Johnson, have you had a chance to review the minutes for Tuesday, March 4th? And would you like to move the approval of those minutes?
I have, and I move approval.
And Representative Johnson moves the approval of the minutes. Any discussion? All those in favor of aye of approving the minutes say aye. Aye. All those opposed say nay. Minutes are approved. Members, we have a couple bills before us, and Representative Lawrence is passing out treats. The two bills we have before us are not actually in the committee's possession, so we're going to be working off their engrossments that came out of the previous committees. We're going to take both of these bills up information only, so we'll do everything we normally would do, except the bills will not be in front of us, and there will be no action taken on those. The bill language and documents are in your folders. And so with that, Representative Bakeberg, I'm going to have you present as a co-author on House File 957. Thank you in many ways for carrying the bill and helping me out there in the test fires. So Representative Bakeberg, please present the bill. And I believe you have a presenter joining you, so. And, oh, I'm sorry. So we're going to begin with House File 957, which, as I said, is an information only. And just to make sure we get this right, the document is H0957WE1. Hotel 0957 Whiskey Echo 1. Okay, Representative Bakeberg.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, members. Just like to welcome all of the mental health workers in the room. Thank you for the important work that you do. Just had a great conversation with some representatives in our office. I mean the cafeteria in the Centennial Office Building. So if you haven't had a chance to meet with a representative, it's a wonderful place to meet. It feels like your school cafeteria in some ways. So House File 957 is appropriately titled Funding and Mandate Flexibility. So this bill is very simple, and the bill allows schools to be flexible in funding and in mandates through the 2028-2029 school year by resolution at the local school board. The funding flexibility provision allows school boards to move money around in various accounts unless it is otherwise restricted by federal funds. The mandate moratorium allows the school board not to comply with new educational mandates adopted in the 23-24 biennium unless restricted by federal law. I'd just like to note that the mandate relief applies to the new mandates enacted during the 23-24 session, and it does not apply to any other mandates that the legislature has passed previously. I just want to talk to the school counselors. So in my normal world, I'm a middle school principal, and I know there's some concern about this. And what I would tell you is there are many, many districts who were not able to access the funds for mental health staff last year. Now, there was good work put in place. There was a floor of $40,000, but there were some restrictions in place. So there are a number of districts that weren't able to hire staff because of that. So that is the spirit of where we're coming from. Where I'm coming from. So the session laws that are covered are the mandates included in the 23 Early Childhood Omnibus Bill, The 23 Education Omnibus Bill, Chapter 55, the 24 Education Policy Omnibus, Chapters 109, the 2004 Education Finance and Children and Families Omnibus, Chapter 115, Paid Family Medical Leave, Earned Sick and Safe Time, and any other amendments these laws enacted during the 23-24 biennium. Just note that federal law may restrict individual districts from opting out, and if federal law does, the school district would not be able to opt out of those mandates, to be very clear. With that, Mr. Chair, that's my introduction, and I'd like to turn it over to testifiers.
Thank you, Representative Bakeberg. And with that, we'll turn it over to your testifier. I'm going to let you do your last name if that's okay. Superintendent for Sebeka Public Schools.
All right. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Representative Bakeberg. Thanks to all the representatives in the room for your support of public schools. And thank you for this opportunity.
And to the testifier, if you could say your name for me
My
and the
name
record,
is-
and then I'll go ahead and make sure I get it right, and then we'll get you started.
My name is Dave Kirkfleet.
Mr. Kirkvliet, please start, and you can begin your testimony.
Okay, as I said, my name is Dave Kirkfleet, and I'm the superintendent at Sebeka Public School District 820. I grew up in St. Paul. Sebeka is about 3 hours northwest of here, but I've been in Sebeka for the past 29 years, and I absolutely love my small-town pre-K public school. My staff are doing amazing things in regards to educating our 450 students, and I'm here to testify in favor of House File 957. Our budget is really struggling. Two major factors are contributing to the struggle: declining enrollment and inflation. Under declining enrollment, some of the issues with that is we have a lower birth rate in the area. We do have Amish communities buying family farms to the west of us, so they don't send their kids to public school. We have a struggling business economy. We have a severe affordable housing shortage, and there's lots of alternative school options nowadays, so students can stay home and go to school online, or homeschool, or PSEO, early college credit options, or they can open enroll. Some of the inflationary costs that we're dealing with are trying to remain competitive with area compensation. We are falling behind in our school district on that, but it's hard to attract and retain staff if you don't have enough funds to do so. Our benefit costs have increased. Health insurance is over 8.1% of our total revenues that come in going out for health insurance, and that's for plans with a $10,000 family deductible or $5,000 single deductible. We have facility maintenance costs. Sebeka has over $500,000 worth of roof sections needing repair, immediate repair, and trying to keep up on our own transportation fleet. We operate our own transportation in Sebeka. And then supply costs, technology inflationary costs, curriculum costs, and our district property and casualty insurance has been skyrocketing. And if we get to a point where our roofs are beyond repair, we can't even get insurance for our school district if that happens. On Tuesday, February 11th, Sebeka Public School went to voters to ask for help with our leaking roofs on the older sections of our building and bus purchases, and it failed. The referendum was for $1.9 million and $50,000 a year for technology and capital project levy support over 10 years to keep up with inflationary costs of curriculum and technology. The tax impact would have been minimal due to utilization of the Ag to Schools tax support, which is a great program, by the way. It would have impacted my taxes, my personal taxes, by $35 a year or $3 a month. Over half our district is agriculture, and that would have impacted them 31 cents per acre a year or 3 cents a month per acre. That's on high land value of $4,000 an acre or better. I have leaks over my kitchen in the school, and I cannot use Fund 2 dollars, which is food service money, to transfer to Fund 1. That's stuck there. I can move from Fund 1 to Fund 2. I can't move it back. And so I can't use food service dollars to fix the roof that's over my food service area. This bill would help that. Why didn't it pass? Wadena County is property wealth poor, very little recreational land or lake property. Wadena County levied an 8% tax increase for FY25, and the city of Sebeka levied another 8% increase for FY25. Personal budgets are tight due to an inflationary cost of goods and services. Taxpayers of the district are already supporting our last building project, which was finished in 2020, and that's on the tax rolls to 36. Taxpayers of the district currently support an operating levy as well. It's a small one at that, but so it's not that our taxpayers haven't been supportive of our school district, but they're saturated. Please note that cities and counties can levy what they need for their budgets, but consequently voting against a school referendum is one of the few avenues taxpayers have to prevent a tax increase. Also note that we had to bond our LTFM dollars out to address HVAC issues, so those are tied up till 2030. So that would be a pot of money that we could use for us, but we already used that pot of money for HVAC. So there's lots of facility needs. Here are the results. Staff reductions, increased class sizes, and reduced offerings are happening in our school district. Program reductions, delayed facility maintenance. I can't buy a bus. It's $130,000 for a small school district. It's the same cost for a bigger school district, but we don't have the funding. And then fee increases to support programs, and then postponing curriculum and technology and classroom supplies are on board. Here are talking points in support of House File 957. It would provide financial flexibility for school districts. It would allow school districts to transfer unencumbered funds between accounts to address local priorities without increasing state aid obligations or property taxes. It would empower school boards to make strategic financial decisions that best serve their students and communities. It would reduce unfunded mandates and administrative burdens. It would give local school boards, who are elected officials as well, the ability to opt out of newly enacted state laws or rules that create additional burdens without corresponding funding. It would ensure schools can focus their resources on student learning rather than compliance with new or potentially unnecessary regulations. It would respect local control and decision-making. It recognizes that the school districts know their students' needs best and should have the authority to determine how to allocate resources and implement policies. It would provide transparency by requiring school boards to publicly post and notify the state of any decision to opt out of new mandates. It would support stability in education funding. Schools often face budget constraints due to inflation, declining enrollment, or changing state funding formulas. This bill provides temporary flexibility to navigate these challenges. It allows districts to preserve essential programs and services by reallocating funds where they are needed most. It ensures fiscal responsibility without raising taxes. The bill explicitly prohibits fund transfers from increasing state aid obligations or leading to new property tax levies. And then it balances accountability with flexibilities. Schools must adopt a formal resolution under this bill before making fund transfers or opting out of mandates, ensuring thoughtful decision-making process. And then the requirement to post decisions publicly in the bill promotes transparency and community engagement. In conclusion, House File 957, in my opinion, is a common sense solution that provides schools with the financial flexibility and regulatory relief they need to focus on what matters most, delivering high quality education to students. By supporting this bill, we empower school districts to make decisions that best fit their unique needs, ensure fiscal responsibility, and reduce unnecessary bureaucratic burdens. Thank you.
And thank you for the testimony, Superintendent Kirkvliet. And with that, we have a couple of public testifiers. So, Superintendent Kirkvliet, I'm going to ask you to just step aside, and then you may get called back up for a question. And the next one we have is Superintendent from New York Mills, Adam Johnson.
Yeah, my name is way easier to pronounce than Dave, so you're welcome. Yeah, I'm Adam Johnson. I'm the superintendent at New York Mills. I'm in my first year here. So the data sheet that you guys have in front of you, I was able to put together once I found about this, just talking about 5 different school districts that I've worked with and talked to the superintendents. So if you look at New York Mills, they're the top school on there. Our revenue in the past 7 years, since 17-18 school year, has increased by 28.5%. The expenditures in the general fund, 01, have kept at a similar rate. But if you look at our statutory operating debt, it's gone up, and now it's declining, even though we have increasing enrollment. ADM on the far right is our enrollment. That's gone from 744 to 796. SOD is a statutory operating debt calculation. That's a total summation of all the restricted funds that we have in our unrestricted and restricted fund balance accounts. So right now, New York Mills is at 25.02, which is healthy. If you look at Sabika schools, going from 17 to 18, they've also seen similar increases, but with their declining enrollment, they've gone from a 33.7% SOD calculation down to a 14.05. Moorhead Public Schools, they've been in the news lately with what they're having to do. You see their increase of 41.7%, but their expenditures have gone up 44.19%, and their enrollment has increased by 600 kids. Their statutory operating debt calculation is now 9.71, which for a big school district like Moorhead, that's a hard number to come up with. You look at some smaller schools like Hill City, that's where I was previously. I was a superintendent and business manager at Hill City. We're a very small school. We've gone from our enrollment up there of 278 down to 236. The statutory operating debt has been a really tough thing to keep in line. We're trying to keep that number healthy. In a small school like Hill City, one small change impacts a lot. Even though it's 25.47, I think it's about $800,000. You make a poor $800,000 decision, you're in statutory operating debt. The bottom one, Deer River Schools, small school up in northern Minnesota, enrollment of 922 down to 820 in the past few years. Their revenue's gone up 20.5, and their expenditures have gone up 13.1%, but now they are 0.03 above statutory operating debt, which puts them in extremely difficult financial situations. And that's everything that's previous to this year. On the upper right, those are New York Mills costs. With paid FMLA coming in, now the last I heard it was a 0.88% increase in all salaries. If the school district was responsible for 100% of that at New York Mills, last fiscal year we would have had a $57,000 bill coming for paid FMLA, which is a teaching position, para position, some sort of position that we don't have the fluff to call it that to lose. We need every single person we have in the district. At best, we can split the cost. That is a $28,000, $29,000 increase, and that is the best that the school district can offer to split with employees. If you look at the insurance costs, we're currently a member of PEEP, the Public Employees Insurance Plan. We've had double-digit increases the past 2 years, 18% and then 16%, which has put a strain on us because we want to keep up, and it puts a strain on our staff because I feel we have the responsibility to offer healthy insurance that's affordable, and when you see 18% and 16% insurance increases, that's really hard. So that's another cost on the school. The last legislative session, they passed unemployment insurance. So in FY24, we saw a $15,000 cost. FY25 is $40,000. That again is another teaching position, staffing position that we are not in the budget right now. So between paid FMLA, unemployment insurance, and every other increase that we've had, we're looking at $70,000, $80,000 of cost that is not going to employees that we have to come up with. That's going to struggle coming up with where that money comes from. So I just want to look at the numbers, and because the numbers don't lie. I know some of the concerns working as a business manager. There's a UFARS code for every single penny we spend as a school. So just going through some of them, the very first set of numbers, it tells you where the money's being spent. So 01 is district, 02 is food service, 04 is community service, and it goes down lines with some debt service and different things like that. The second set of numbers is where the money's being spent district-wide, elementary, middle school, high school. So there's 005, 100, 200, 300. Then the next set of numbers is a program code that tells you what department that money's being spent on. So if somebody was interested in knowing exactly, I was a high school math teacher, so I'm using that as an example. If someone want to know my benefits, how much we're spending in high school math, there is a 17-digit code of 01 300 276 000 140, and that's how much money we're spending exactly on math teachers at the high school level. And you could break that down by every single thing. So in terms of transparency to the state, we can print off a giant UFARS formula, and we can get that for anybody that has questions of exactly what we're spending on. So if we have this flexibility, we're not going to hide money, we're not going to shuffle money. What we want to do is be able to be flexible to support our students and our staff the best way that we feel is possible. So for New York Mills, we would be keeping an extra $1 million to use it the best way that's possible. So.
And Mr. Johnson, if you can hang on for 1 second.
Yep.
A quick editorial comment, and then I'm going to get a clarification. But members, my history goes back with school finance all the way back to, many of you may know or may not know, Tom Melcher. So that's my history with this. And when people talk to me about this, and I was talking to a member walking up here about how this is the nuts and bolts of what we do. This is what this committee does. This is how technical this gets. As we're looking at the information in front of us, we can raise the water, we can lower the water, we can move things around a spreadsheet, but that's what we're hearing. And so with that, I want to go to a clarification. Chair Joachim, you're looking for a clarification, and I'll let you ask nonpartisan staff your question.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And Mr. Strom, I know what statutory operating debt is. I can't remember the percentage you have to fall below, but I'm not quite understanding the calculations that Superintendent Johnson was stating on his form about statutory operating debt calculations. Could you just maybe explain statutory operating debt for folks?
Mr. Strom?
Chair Kresha, Representative Joachim, statutory operating debt is the term the state uses when the district's general fund, Fund 1 budget is more than 2.5% in the red. So they look at the total expenditures, and if they're more than 2.5% in the red, the districts and they use the net negative operating is the term used, but the statutory operating debt is 2.5%, and there's a plan that needs to be filed with the department each year that a school district is in statutory operating debt. MDE issues an annual report, and the new one should be out any day now for fiscal year '24 that shows the districts that are in, and charter schools that are in statutory operating debt. It's probably best if the superintendent explained what he was saying on this front.
Mr. Johnson, would you like to add clarifying comments?
Yeah, so our SOD calculation, basically what I've learned is every 10% is about a month we can afford. So if state funding was cut off, like for New York Mills, for instance, we could go about 2.5 months with what we have in our reserved or restricted fund balance accounts. If you look at a school like Deer River, that's a day. They have a day in their unrestricted or restricted fund balance accounts to survive. But in each of these fin codes, so the different financial codes, so something like unemployment insurance, that has a fin code, I believe, of 418, and then there's regular unemployment that's 417. So we can track how much money is being spent on unemployment insurance with one of those fin codes. So we have these restricted funds like that, or student support personnel aid, staff development, down to library aid, that are in restricted funds, that this bill, the way I read it, would give us the flexibility to use this to help support staff in a different way. And I know it's a short-term fix, but helping us in the short term is going to go a long ways to helping us in the long term, especially as you see levying costs increase, and that's the far left number. Everybody's seeing big increases to levy amounts at the local level.
Representative Joachim, follow up?
Mr. Chair, thank you. I'm married to a math teacher for a reason, so could you please explain again what the statutory operating debt calculations column mean? Does that mean that is your budgetary reserves that you have on hand, and you're just looking at that to see how much you have before you'd hit statutory operating debt? I'm used to districts carrying about a 10 to 12% operating reserve.
Yep.
But I see these numbers as bigger, so I was just trying to figure out what that calculation went into that column.
Yep, so that's basically what we have in our unrestricted or restricted fund balance accounts, depending on how everything works in your financial system. So some schools have policies that range up anywhere from 15 to 20%, especially in northern Minnesota. So for example, like Hill City, even though our number is 25.47% in Hill City, that is about $800,000. That's 8 teachers. So if something happens, they don't have a large fund balance in Hill City to be able to afford something catastrophic happening, because being such a small school, even though it's 25%, that's still a relatively small dollar amount that it actually is. If they're carrying a 5% fund balance, you're looking at a couple $1,000s.
And Representative Joachim? And I'm sure we'll come back to this after testimony, so thank you, Mr. Johnson, appreciate that. And so just to clarifying for Mr. Johnson, would you say that the SOD is your early indicators of solvency?
Yep, that if we look at that, so like on the UFAR's compliance report, which can be found on MDE, MFR, Minnesota Financial Reports, you can pull those off and look at anybody's UFAR's compliance to see what any school district is, and that's where all this data came from. You can see enrollment data, you can see SOD, so like when you get the audit done in the fall of every year, you look at your SOD calculation and say, what are we doing for next year? It gives you a history, a projection of what is happening in school district. Are we financially healthy or are we unhealthy?
Thank you, Mr. Johnson.
Yes, thank you, guys.
Chris Crocker, St. Michael, Albertville.
Mr. Chair, can I just ask one quick follow-up to that?
Since, did you need Mr. Johnson to come back up?
No, just, I'm wondering, could, Mr. Chair, if nonpartisan would be able to get us some kind of runs about state sanitary operating debt for districts?
So, Mr. Strum?
Mr. Chair, Representative Sensimera, yes, I'd be happy to provide that. One of the issues that Superintendent Johnson mentioned is that this restricted versus what's in the fund balance that folks see is often a confusing issue. But I'll send out a run to all of you a little later today that shows the last general fund balances as a percentage for each district.
Does that work for you, Representative
Yes,
Sensimera?
thank you.
Very good. All right, Ms. Crocker, if you'd state your name for the record and begin your testimony, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. My name is Chris Crocker. I'm the Executive Director of Business Services for St. Michael Albertville Schools, or STMA, as we refer to ourselves. Thank you all for your time today. I appreciate being here and being able to share a little bit of our story with you. I'd like to highlight a few pieces of legislation passed during the last two sessions, some of what you've already heard today, specifically that and how they're impacting our district. While we support these programs because they benefit students and staff, they come at a cost, and their lack of funding or underfunding adversely affects our students. First, we support the READ Act. The READ Act is undeniably good for kids, and we are grateful for the state READ Act funding that allowed us to train Phase 1 staff. However, not all required components are fully funded. For example, we face a $463,000 shortfall to implement the state mandated K-4 curriculum, and we are short over $12,000 to fulfill the K-12 assessment requirements. In total, the funding gap for the READ Act is almost $500,000 for us, which is equivalent to approximately 6 teaching positions in our district. Second, 95% of our staff are represented by collective bargaining agreements and receive generous paid leave. Besides the substantial operational impacts of administering and tracking ESST and paid leave programs, my district anticipates it will cost us $400,000 in next school year to cover substitute costs and payroll-related costs stemming from these new laws, which is equivalent to about 5 teachers in our district. Third, we have wonderful support staff that we greatly value and are grateful to legislators for the $135 million that was allocated to cover between terms unemployment costs. However, this funding is projected to be depleted for next school year. For our district, this cost is estimated around $600,000 in the current school year. And unfortunately, starting in next year, this will have to come from our general fund, our main operating fund that supports the classroom. The $600,000 is equivalent to about 7.5 teachers. Between those 4 mandates, to summarize, the total district cost to us is about $1.5 million, or approximately 19 teachers. To make matters worse, our district is among the approximately 30% of districts in the state unable to pass an operating levy. This challenge is largely due to STMA being a property-poor community with limited commercial and industrial development to broaden the tax base. As a result, the tax burden disproportionately falls onto our residential homeowners. For an operating levy, STMA taxpayers pay significantly more than taxpayers in nearby property-rich communities with ample commercial and industrial development. Our taxpayers also face higher costs for local optional revenue. Following 2 recent failed operating levies in our community, many taxpayers have expressed their strong support for our schools, and we feel that in our communities. However, they emphasize that they simply cannot shoulder the large tax burden. Not long ago, my district faced the difficult task of cutting $7.3 million and 77 staff positions. Truly devastating time for our schools and community. Thanks to funding provided through 2023 legislation, we were able to recover somewhat. However, we continue to face challenges, including high class sizes and loss of programming. While the programs I've highlighted today benefit both students and staff, the unfortunate reality is that we simply cannot afford to sustain them. In closing, the flexibility of fund transfers outlined within House File 957 would provide an opportunity to help with these costs, giving my district local control of our funds while not increasing the state obligations or increasing property tax authority. Fund transfers would empower us to allocate resources where they're needed most, tailoring those investments to the specific needs of our students, rather than diverting general fund resources away from the classroom. Again, I appreciate the opportunity this morning. Thank you.
And thank you, Ms. Crocker. And just stand by in case there's a question for you. So I will bring up William Schwant next from Bloomington Public Schools. And please let me know if I pronounce that correctly, so I'll let you state your name for the record and
Yeah.
okay.
Chair, you got that right today. My name is William Schwant.
Today, what is it tomorrow?
Good afternoon. Like I said, my name is William Schwant. I'm a special ed paraprofessional in Bloomington, Minnesota. I am also the president of the local paraprofessional union. I'm actually here to testify against House File 957. This allows school boards to pass a resolution not to comply, as it states in the description of the bill, with new education laws or new state education rules. One of those would be paid paraprofessional professional development. Paraprofessionals spend each day working directly with students. In many cases, with the students with whom paraprofessionals work are those that are the youngest and/or those who need the extra help and attention to reach their fullest potential. Paraprofessionals come from many walks of life, and the majority do not have the experience or the expertise to address the disabilities, learning challenges, behavioral challenges, or possess the knowledge to what is the best practice to teach students. In fact, I spend more time each day with my students than their special ed teacher spends with them in an entire week. I am sure that parents have an expectation that people working with their students are properly trained. And allowing school districts to opt out of providing meaningful and much-needed professional development for paraprofessionals is bad. It's bad for paraprofessionals, and it's bad for students. Professional development has been a part of special education statute for as long as I can remember. Prior to 2023, it was not reimbursed by the state. And it was up to school boards to make sure that districts were providing appropriate professional development for paraprofessionals. It was done inconsistently, and local control in that situation was plainly just not working. In closing, we cannot allow school districts to balance their budgets on the back of our hourly school staff. We're the ones that really do make school happen. The custodians, the bus drivers, the clerical staff, and the paraprofessionals. By allowing schools to not comply with what has been passed in the last couple of years, results in student achievement will not be there. We need to make sure that every paraprofessional is properly and adequately given the training that they need. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Schwant. And again, if you want to stand by in case there's a further question for you.
Thanks.
Mr. Uni from the Department of Education, please. Mr. Uni, you know the drill.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chair, members. My name is Adosh Shuni. I'm the Director of Government Relations for the Minnesota Department of Education. I've had the pleasure of providing some comments on the overarching bill that contained these components, HF6, so my comments will be largely the same, but I think it's important to have these on the record for refreshing memory. First, I do want to be clear that MDE remains open to partnering on improvements to our education system and does recognize the challenges that our educators and schools face in terms of providing the best world-class, high-quality education for all of our students. One of the reasons that the legislature, you all decision makers along with the governor, worked so hard in 23 and 24 to allocate a significant amount of resources for our schools on behalf of our educators, families, and schools. But we do have serious concerns about the fund transfer and relief from mandates proposal in this bill. allowing all of our local education agencies, or LEAs, to individually choose which law to follow and not follow could create a confusing patchwork of different expectations from school to school and district to district. We risk losing a lot of oversight and accountability for the use of state funds and consistent expectations around the education, the world-class education that we want to provide Minnesota students. Additionally, what would this mean for decision makers, including you all, understanding the impact and effectiveness of programs across the state? For example, what would this mean for students and families for areas like consistent provision of school meals, literacy, charter school oversight and finance accountability reforms, non-exclusionary discipline, English learner services, advances for American Indian students, and compliance with the authority of our Office of Inspector General investigations on aids and grants, as well as MDE oversight and monitoring. MDE would find it extremely difficult to offer guidance on the infinite possibilities of fund transfers and decisions to not follow particular states and state laws and rules. This would result in significant confusion and result in compliance issues, as well as possible liability for our LEAs making these decisions. How impactful and meaningful would the investments and requirements related to the READ Act, something we're going to hear about later, be if any LEA could decide to not follow certain portions or not allocate funding to the efforts that the legislature directed? So in summary, we just express extreme caution in allowing unfettered fund transfers, as well as being able to pass board resolutions to not follow any particular law from the perspective of oversight, monitoring, consistent guidance, as well as being able for decision makers to have a clear idea around the impact and effectiveness of any law, not just in 23 and 24 with the fund transfers that happened that were passed before even that time period. So thank you very much for the opportunity to provide some comments, and I stand for any questions later in the hearing.
Thank you, Mr. Uni. And with that, we have remote testifiers. So cross your fingers. It's been good lately, so I think let's hope everything holds together. I have Teresa Greninger.
Greniger.
I'm sorry, what was that?
Greniger.
Thank you. And so if you would state your name for the record, and thank you for the correction on the pronunciation, and begin your testimony.
Okay, my name's Teresa Greniger, and I'm a para at King Elementary in Deer River. Paras need support to do our jobs and help students succeed. The 2023 legislature made real progress by ensuring paid family and medical leave, earned sick time, and dedicating training funds. HF 957 threatens to undo that progress. While I appreciate the amendment exempting unemployment, this bill still puts other critical benefits at risk, which is why I strongly oppose. I'd like to share a personal story. Last October, my mom entered hospice care, and I knew she didn't have much time left. I couldn't afford to take many days off, so my sisters took care of her without me. She passed away on October 24th. At the same time, my boyfriend was also on hospice battling brain cancer. As his condition worsened, I spent one final day with him before he passed on November 14th. Had paid family and medical leave been in place, I wouldn't have had to choose between my paycheck and being with my loved ones in their final moments. I wish I had that time. One of the hardest things was forcing myself back to work while grieving, emotionally exhausted and unwell, but I had to go back because I couldn't afford any more unpaid days. All Minnesotans need paid family and medical leave. Allowing school boards to opt out would be devastating for underpaid school workers like me, who simply don't have the resources to take time off when we need it most. It's not just paid family and medical leave this bill could impact. Paras work closely with students who have many different needs. Before any para starts working at a school, they should be given the appropriate training to teach social skills and de-escalation techniques when students are in fight or flight mode. How we respond is vital to this outcome. These trainings should be mandatory, and school boards shouldn't be allowed to opt out of them. For all of these reasons and more, I urge you to stand with us and oppose HF 957. Thank you for your time.
And thank you very much for your testimony. The next testifier, I'm sorry, I'm just not even going to pretend to try to do your name. So stand up. Kulia. Oh, Kulia Pringle, if I have that correct. Thank you for that.
Yep.
Stand Up Minnesota Parents United. Did I get that correct?
Yep, you did. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you,
Members
Mr.
of the
Withers.
committee. Can you hear me?
We can hear you. Please begin your testimony.
Okay. Thank you, Chair. Members of the committee, I appreciate the opportunity to address you today regarding House File 957 and 877. While I do understand the intent behind these bills is to provide flexibility and relief to our school districts, I have significant concerns about the potential negative impacts that may have on the quality and equity of education in Minnesota. Concerns regarding House File 957 uh, proposes to grant school districts the authority to transfer funds between accounts and opt out of compliance with certain recently enacted state laws or rules. Specifically, the bill allows for financial flexibility, which can be beneficial, or it sounds like it's beneficial, but families are worried about allowing school districts, um, sorry about that. Families are worried about allowing school boards to opt out of compliance with state laws or rules that which could possibly lead to significant disparities in educational quality across districts. Statewide standards ensure that students, regardless of their geographic location, have access to a consistent and equitable education. Permitting unrestricted fund transfers between accounts may lead to diversion of funds from essential programs such as special education or student support services to cover budget shortfalls in other areas. This could disproportionately affect the vulnerable student populations who rely on these critical services. Broad authority granted to school boards to opt out of compliance with state laws lacks sufficient oversight mechanism. This could result in decisions that are not in the best interest of students, parents, or educators, and diminish public trust in our educational institutions. Regarding House File 877, which seeks to amend the READ Act and cancel certain appropriations, while the specifics of the amendments are not detailed in the available information, the
And
cancellation
Ms.
of
Pringle, I just want to make sure, House Files, the READ Act is our next bill.
Okay, when I signed up, I just signed up to testify.
And
for
what I was
both
going to,
bills.
if you'd like to get that testimony in now so we don't have to come back with a remote, go ahead and proceed.
I would appreciate it, Chair.
Go ahead and proceed.
Thank you. House File 877 seeks to amend the READ Act and cancel certain appropriations. While the specifics of the amendments are not detailed in the available information, the cancellation of appropriation raises the following concerns. Reductions in funding may disproportionately impact underfunded schools and districts, exacerbating existing educational inequities. It seeks to weaken the READ Act by removing critical language related to equity, cultural responsiveness, and race. This bill does not change the words. It erases the acknowledgement of the diverse needs of Minnesota students and the systemic barriers they face in education. Minnesota has some of the worst racial disparities in education in the country. If we are serious about closing the achievement gap, we cannot afford to strip away language that ensures literacy instruction meets the needs of all students, including Black, Indigenous, and other students of color. By removing terms like cultural responsiveness and references to race, ignores the reality that students bring different backgrounds and experiences to the classrooms. Research shows that when literacy instruction is culturally relevant, students are more engaged and achieve better outcomes. Furthermore, the READ Act was intended to be a step forward in making literacy instruction more inclusive and effective for all children. House File 877 takes us backwards. It signals that the needs of marginalized students are not a priority. If we erase the language that acknowledges racial disparities in literacy, we are also erasing our responsibility to address them. All Minnesotan students deserve literacy instruction that recognizes and values who they are. Thank you so much, Chair, for letting me getting both of my testimonies in.
And you're welcome. And thank you for your testimony on both bills. John Peterson from Minnesota EEP.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. My name is Leotawa Dr. John Peterson. I'm the Senior Fellow and Director of Policy with the Minnesota Education Equity Partnership, MNEEP. Talofa lava manuia. Good afternoon, Minnesota House Education Finance Committee chairs and members. First, thank you for your service to our state. As a former K-12 classroom teacher, coach, principal, and district administrator, I recognize the hard work and commitment it takes to serve our students, families, staff, and communities. 11 years ago, the nation-leading Minnesota LEAPS Act was passed, affirming a research-based, high bar, while also providing guidance to schools on how to meet that high bar by honoring the home languages and cultures of our students as assets. Last session, appropriations were made to better support English learner students, or ELs, and English as second language ESL staff by reducing the EL cross subsidy and investing critical new dollars into EL programs for the first time in 2 decades. These investments represented the beginning of a new and better approach in supporting ELs and ESL staff. Additionally, this past session, a legislatively mandated EL task force was created to report back to the committee on the current state of EL programming, funding, and accountability in Minnesota. And while yet more is needed to support ELs across Minnesota, the reduction of the EL cross subsidy and the creation of the task force represented bold new steps in the right direction for better meeting with the intent of the LEAPS Act of 2014. The bill before you today, however, represents a step backward from the direction set during this past legislative session. The broad and non-specific language of the bill would provide local education agencies, LEAs, with nearly unfettered flexibility to use funds, potentially EL-designated funds, for purposes other than serving our EL students. In 2024, statewide math proficiency for ELs was 12%, the lowest of any subgroup of students in Minnesota and a full 53 percentage points lower than white students. In 2024, statewide reading proficiency for ELs was 9%, the lowest of any subgroup of students in Minnesota and a full 59 percentage points lower than white students. HF 957 proposes to provide LEAs with the flexibility to reassign funds that could very well exacerbate an already enormous gap in math and reading proficiency between EL students and white students by potentially taking funds from EL programs and services and using them elsewhere. I urge you to consider the potentially negative ramifications of this bill, should it pass in its current form, on the lives of EL students, families, staff, and communities. Faftai Lava, thank you for your time.
And I believe I heard in the introduction, Dr. Peterson, is that correct?
That is correct.
Thank you for your testimony, Dr. Peterson.
Thank you, Mr.
And
Chair.
let's move on to Paul Durbin, Albert Lee Public Schools.
Good afternoon, Ed Finance Committee. Can you hear me okay?
We can hear you.
Thank you for your time this afternoon. My name is Paul Durbin, Executive Director of Finance and Operations in Albert Lee for Albert Lee Schools. We're a school district of about 3,200 students, K-12. We have a large special services student population and a large English language learner population. We're facing a few challenges in our school district, and finances are getting tight. Our enrollment is declining, mostly due to declining birth rates in our area. With that, our funding is reduced. Most of our funding is tied to formulas that are tied to enrollment. And most of our revenue in our district comes from state aid. So with that, our funding isn't keeping pace with increasing costs or expenditures. Our basic formula adjustment, 2.74% this year, truly doesn't represent a 2.74% increase in revenues overall. It's just a small portion, about 45% of our revenues in total. And the rest of it isn't keeping pace with the increase in costs and expenditures that we see. And with that, also a local optional referendum of $724 per student has been stagnant since I think 2021 was the last time we saw an increase to that formula. And so we're seeing a gap get broader and broader when we look at the revenue stream coming into our district. And so we're facing some challenges as our enrollment declines, our revenue's decreasing. We've been making responsible decisions as a school to reduce staffing along with those enrollment declines. So we're trying to stay steady with that. Last year, we made cuts of about $1.2 million. This year, we're projecting that we're going to need to make about reductions of about $2.6 million for next year's budget to maintain a healthy fund balance. And when we look at our financial projections into the future, 3-4 years out, we're seeing continued annual reductions or cuts of about $2 million a year just to maintain a healthy fund balance. So with that, I'll just keep this short. I believe in House File 957, advocating in favor, the flexibility in the use of funds and the time to process and plan for mandates. It will provide relief for schools, and we think it's going to have a positive impact in schools in our area. So thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Durbin. The last testifier we have remotely is Ryan Lager, Belle Plaine. If you'll state your name for the record and please begin your testimony.
I will. My name is Ryan Lager. I'm the superintendent of the Belle Plaine Public Schools. Good afternoon, Chair of the House Finance Committee here, and I appreciate the opportunity to be able to testify today. It's been interesting to listen to all the testimony, and I've learned a few things here today in processing this and what this impact could be, and I hope that people gain full understanding in what I think is trying to be accomplished here and how maybe it can actually benefit members who are somewhat concerned about House File 957. With the budget forecast being released today, I think we all know that money is going to be tight. I would be the first to tell you that I am a supporter of having the multiple funds that we do in the ways we do, because it ensures that we maintain quality community education programming, that we're able to provide high quality food service to our kids. It allows us opportunities to maintain our buildings and do things like that. But at a time when dollars and resources become as tight as they are going to become for many school districts, I strongly support House File 957. Just this morning, I had a conversation with a paraprofessional who received core training, which goes along with the READ Act, because our goal is to also train our paraprofessionals as well as our teachers, because they work closely with these students. But as many of my colleagues, superintendents and business managers who work closely with the resources and funds that we have in the district have expressed here today, money is getting really tight. And 80% roughly of most school district budgets are made up of staff. And the only solution we have in the end, if we don't have the resources, is to reduce staff. And I personally want to keep all of my paraprofessionals. I want to train them around the READ Act and other things that the state has asked us to do, that I think many of us are strongly in favor of and seeing significant results. With that, I want to just address a couple of things that I think go along with this. I often ask a lot of people, including some in this room who I know personally that are legislators, if I were to ask how much money was sitting in food service fund balances at the end of fiscal year 21, I wonder how many people could answer that question. I will tell you it's $126,113,327. If I were to ask the members on this committee how much money is sitting in food service fund balances in the state of Minnesota, which I will tell you we virtually can use for very little things, that number is $260,986,184.85. That is an increase from fiscal year 21 to 24 just in the food service fund balance in districts across the state of Minnesota of $134,872,857.85. I do have a great relationship with my business manager, but I always tell him we're not a bank. The money that is in our school district is intended to be spent on the kids and the staff who are here today. I'm not one who wants to run a 20, 25, or 30% fund balance. I want to be able to make payroll, but I want to make sure that we're paying our providing the programming that they need. Why I support House File 957, especially through the time frame that it is it's going to help us at a time when I know the state is going to have some difficulty in the revenues that they have coming in and the budget projections that are out there. These fund transfers, especially specifically out of food service, we have over $250 million sitting in food service fund balances in school districts that they can't use to hire paraprofessionals. They can't use to hire mental health support professionals that all of us need more of. They can't be used to help us train our paraprofessionals or additional staff on literacy training. They can't help us in terms of contract settlements and things like that. The other piece that I want to address that's come up today a little bit is, I was in a meeting last night in a metro district, and I think one of the things people are having a really hard time understanding is we made this record investment in education. But a couple of my colleagues have expressed today the challenge in that investment, especially as it pertains to enrollment. From 2019 to 2024 in the state of Minnesota, school districts lost an average of 84.27 students. Rural districts lost an average of 34.13 students, and metro districts lost an average of 368.37 students. Over that time, 210 school districts in Minnesota out of 327 had declining enrollment. So I think when a lot of people struggle to understand, we made a record investment. Why are so many school districts having financial challenges or trouble? Because of how we're paid on ADM, with districts having declining enrollment, it actually puts them in a position where they get less money. I'm going to give you just a brief example of that. With the 2.74% increase that I'm going to get in Belle Plaine next year that was just released last week based on the inflationary increase, I am actually going to get, I should preface that, if the governor's proposal around compensatory reduction, which for us would be about $24,000, and the 5% reduction in special education, I would actually get $53,095.69 less next year in my budget than I had this year. And the result of that is I will have 56 fewer students in my district because I'm bringing in a class of 101 and have a senior class of 130. And when we adjust for enrollment, we'll have about 56 less kids in the district. So one of the challenges that's happening out in the districts is as we have declining enrollment and our aid is paid that way.
I don't want to, I do need to have you get to a closer. We do have member questions, so if you could help us out with that.
Yeah, just in closing in that, I have obligations for next year. As I say, I'm getting 53,000 less of an 8% health insurance increase at 105,000 steps. If just for our teachers to come back to work next year and not have any salary increase is $125,000. And paid family medical leave will cost our district $80,000. So just going into next year, I have $310,000 in new money obligations I'm going to have to come up with. And I'm starting the year with $53,095 less, even with the 2.74% increase because of the declining enrollment, student enrollment. So with that, I'll close, and if there are any questions, I'll take those.
And thank you, Mr. Lugger, and if you could just stand by. And so members, with that, that concludes the public testimony, and I want to thank all the testifiers. I am going to ask Mr. Uni and Mr. Superintendent Kirklick to come back up. And we do have a series of questions, so, and we do have one more information we'll be able to cover. So I think we're fine on time, but I want to keep the good conversation. So the two questions that I have are for the superintendent and for Mr. Uni. We're hearing both sides of this, which is very important. And so as I look to the comments, or as I wrote down some comments from Mr. Uni in the Department of Education. One of the things that we expect from the Department of Education is the oversight and accountability, and I heard those in your comments. You also said, guarding against the, and your words, not mine, the unfettered transfer of funds between accounts. And so my question is, does the Department of Education really see the unfettered transfer as a problem to be watching out for? And then I'll throw the same question over to the superintendent, because you're responsible, you have to do audits, so you do have some checks and balances. So I just want to get a gauge of how both sides see this and how much of a problem we should pay attention to on this. Whoever wants to go. Mr. Uni, I'll go to you first since I...
Yeah, Mr. Chair, again, for the record, Ido Shuni, Director of Government Relations for the Minnesota Department of Education. It's a kind of we don't know, right? Mm-hmm. Because of the way the proposal is currently constructed, it is by a local decision, right? We have well over 500 LEAs that could be making decisions about which fund transfers they would like to make. And that is, it's not just the fund transfers alone, right? There's an interaction with which laws they would decide from that was passed in 23-24 that each LEA would decide they in part or in whole will not be following. And many of those laws do have authority for the department to determine how that funding is calculated, how that funding has any checks and balances that we have to do. So that implicates the oversight and monitoring in terms of how the funds are used. And one thing I will point out is that one of the purposes of many of our funding proposals is that the children or students that generate the funding generate it because of maybe they're at risk or they've been historically underrepresented. And if that funding is then turned and used for another purpose, for example, compensatory revenue, I know that was raised, basic skills, English learner revenue, is for an intended purpose of benefiting those students and those students who generate it. And so without being able to have that funding tied to those programs that are written out in law, directed for those students that actually generate the funding, we don't have the capability of fulfilling our duty to oversight over how those funds are used. And then on the fund transfer portion, I think our school finance team has a range of questions about how they manage the school finance codes and how those funds are generated from the laws that are written and how they flow out through the systems to the LEAs.
So thank you, Mr. Rooney. So, Mr. Kirkland, so how would you respond to, you heard the Department of Education, their uncertainties wrapped around their charters, oversight, and so forth. How do you respond to help remove some of that uncertainty and, allow them to complete their charter?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I don't feel that this bill is in the nature of being unfettered. I wrote that word down. From my understanding of the bill, there would be a process for schools to be able to do this, including their local school boards having to pass resolutions. And so there would be checks and balances with this bill. It would not be a martial law per se over school funding. And then I also, to the gentleman who is a paraprofessional testifying against, we absolutely cherish our paraprofessionals. I don't believe the nature of this bill is to reduce professional development. In fact, in our school district, we have chosen to train our paraprofessionals fully in the READ Act, not with the shorter version that was unrolled later, because we feel our paraprofessionals are equally important to our students' experience in education because they're on the front lines with the students. I don't believe that's what the spirit of the bill is about. But what Mr. Bakeberg mentioned was, for example, funding like student support aid, where we were sent $40,000 for a new hire. We're in a situation where we can't afford new hires. We can't find new hires. $40,000 is not enough to hire a full-time position, and we can't find a part-time person in our small community. That funding is being restricted from us being able to use it to maybe retain paraprofessionals. So the choice becomes, do we untie some red tape to this funding so that we can retain our paraprofessionals, so we can retain our teachers and take care of some needs like leaking roofs over our kitchen? Or do we leave the red tape on and cut positions and hurt our students? Which I would say would be the worst option of the two. So it's unfortunate we're in this situation with funding, but we really are.
And so, thank you. So one further question for me, and then I'll go to questions. And I'm going to start with you, Superintendent Kirkland. So during my tenure here and in the schools and all that, I think that when a policy is put in place or a budget, there can be the assumption that all schools in the state are facing the exact same problems at the exact same times. And which sometimes leads to the unflexible nature of things. How would you respond to that? And then I'll come to you, Mr. Rooney.
I would disagree that that's the case. I would say that every school district has unique needs and where they're at, both with their staff and their facilities. And even from me to Mr. Johnson's school, which we're about 20 miles apart, his needs are different than mine right now. And that's why he would take different avenues and make different decisions on his funding than I would. The school to the north of me, 10 miles, same thing. Even though we share some paired sports, we have different needs within our district. So we have different financial decisions that we make. We have different elected officials on our school boards. And so we need flexibility and local control when it comes to our funding.
And so just to put a finer point on that, so when you say you make different decisions than maybe Superintendent Johnson, it's not that you are seeing your charters differently, it's you're handling what's in front of you differently. Is that, would I hear that correctly?
Correct.
Okay. Mr. Rooney, if you want to respond to that?
Mr. Chair, maybe you can tailor the question for me.
Yeah, I'm just, and again, I'm trying to get both sides here. And I've had bills as well. What I'm trying to get to is, I think that when we put a charter in front of you, there's the assumption that all schools are facing the exact same problem at the exact same time. And I don't believe that's true is what I'm at, and how do we get to that flexibility is one. So knowing that the Department of Ed's charter is, you almost have to adopt that mentality that all schools are facing the exact same problems at the exact same time. And want to give you an opportunity to respond to that.
Yeah, I think, Mr. Chair, members, I think sometimes it's easy to lose the mission that MDE tries to carry out in the space of being an agency that oversees or that helps administer funding as well as guidance for districts across the state when we do have local control. And we do want districts and charters to be able to tailor the education that they provide to their students based on their student population and their community needs. There are there's a vast range of control that districts and charters have. Number one is that they determine their curriculum for how they administer academic standards. The department is tasked with convening committees, statewide committees, for coming up with the standards for each academic area then we provide guidance and professional development and facilitate that process. For funding formulas, you as the legislature and the department helps administer. We have a range of funding formulas that is driven, one, by who the students they are supposed to serve, whether it's for students who are receiving special education services, students who are receiving English learner services, students or schools that need help with increasing their student-to-student support personnel ratios. Within those structures, we do have broad guidelines about how those funds should be distributed, but within those guidelines, districts and charters are able to carry out the programs that fit their particular areas, their particular student bodies. So we do believe that one of the ways that you all, in collaboration with the governors, any governor who signs in laws into place, are that they are structured to allow for locals to be able to determine how that funding is used for the students that ultimately are the ones that generate that funding on their behalf.
Thank you. Okay, members, so the task before us, we do have another bill that we're going to get to. I'd like to at least give 20 minutes for that. So knowing this, the very important side of this, Lead Joachim, did you want to go first or do you want to be at the end? So, okay, I'm going to go to Joachim first, and then I have Representative Joachim first, and then I have 7 other members on the list.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and I'll try to be quick. A lot of it's just comments or concerns I wanted to voice, and then one quick question. So when we talk about flexibility, 60 to 65% of the education formula is on that average daily membership. As one of the testifiers pointed out, it's tough when a school is facing declining enrollment, but that 65% is completely flexible for a district to use how they choose. We have 14 plus different categoricals that really drill down into the type of student a district has, that like an EL student that gets extra dollars, and we increase that because we saw the need, but now that's on the list of something that can be transferred to somewhere else. We have things like transportation sparsity for districts that have to drive further with their buses. That's another categorical. We have our compensatory aid for those that are struggling learners, which we hear, that's probably the number one thing I hear from school districts is that compensatory aid formula needs to be fixed and they need more money for it. Luckily, that part's also indexed to inflation. But I am having a hard time understanding if there's not enough money in the system, which I truly believe there isn't. Even though we made historic investments, we only filled about a third of the hole. Because 20 years of underfunding, with 5 of those years of getting 0% increases, it's hard to climb out of that hole. So moving money around that's already scarce, I'm having a hard time understanding. What I did appreciate, though, was that folks were talking about specific things like the nutrition formulas or student support personnel aid. I have a bill coming up that has a lot more flexibility in that I've actually been working with the stakeholders on, instead of just saying you get to do whatever you want. So for those social workers in the audience, the student support personnel aid was meant to help hire more social workers, nurses, counselors, and psychologists in our schools. And I know it's been having some challenges, especially with districts that we did a $40,000 base because we didn't want to just do average daily membership, because for smaller schools that doesn't get them very far. Sorry, and then I did also hear mention the unemployment insurance and the cost of that. That has been completely paid with the fund we started. And we also have money in the tails for the special ed paras on that. But we do know that it's running out. And we have a bill that we would like to have heard that talks about filling that out for the next year and a half. And then also, the one question, I will probably leave it at that unless I am very interested in, because I also saw a theme from folks that about the nutrition accounts. With the universal meals, you're getting more money in your nutrition accounts, and I know the federal dollars are really restricted, but the state dollars can have some flexibility. And you guys came with a great idea last year to have that flexibility for lunchroom tables, and want to work on you with more flexibility on that. But those accounts are specifically used for in the lunchroom, for food, for paying your workers more. And I don't think moving them over to hire staff outside the lunchroom envelope would be feasible, but that's something we can discuss. But I guess the final question I would have, or another comment I'd heard from people that are concerned, the folks in community ed, 75% of their money comes from fees for service. People pay for the classes. But with this bill, you could tap into that money and just take it and move it into the school district to hire more teachers. So, then what happens to the community ed program where people paid fees for? So I think that's some of the concern and the angst you're hearing from folks about having that kind of free-flowing instead of drilling down and coming together and talking about specific things you'd like to move or specific ideas like around nutrition. The one last thing I have and the question I have that I'm worried about too, there are some requirements that we actually attached funding to. So if you choose not to do that requirement, like menstrual equity or opioid analgesics, where we did $2 a pupil for, and you choose not to do that, you just get to keep those $2 and move it somewhere else. So that's the concern. And I know it sounds like the UFARS codes and all the codes, I can't even imagine. That sounds like I know it's an incredibly hard job. Just ask folks in Robbinsdale that accidentally overcounted their compensatory aid twice and now they're facing budget shortfalls. It's very complicated. But it's going to become even more complicated for MDE and those at the state level to figure out where things are going if each and every school does something different. And does something different, and then you have a student moving from one school to another, how does their education stay contiguous? So my question is, with this bill, maybe this is to the author, if you choose not to do the opioid analgesics, Narcan in your buildings, or menstrual products for our female students that are missing up to 4 days a month of school, when we're talking about absenteeism, do you give us that $2 back?
Representative Bakeberg.
So if a school district chooses to not follow a mandate immediately, they choose to wait until 2029, then they're also choosing to not get the funding for that mandate. I would also add that specific to menstrual products, schools have done an amazing job providing safe products to students for years. In the nurse's office, in a counseling area, so that a student can access those, so a young girl can access those in a safe environment. So, but to answer the question directly, if they choose to delay it, they choose to not get the funding.
Mr. Chair, quick question.
Chair Youakim.
And I won't ask if you think our bathrooms are unsafe. It's really tough for girls to sometimes go down to the counselors or the nurse's office. It's a little stigmatizing. But just quick question though, where does it say that in the bill?
Representative Bakeberg, or did you want to go to nonpartisan staff?
Go ahead and go to nonpartisan.
Maybe you don't have an answer. I'm sorry.
Mr. Chair, Representative Youakim and Bakeberg, I think the issue with the $2 on the operating capital for those products would stay in the formula. That is essentially the equivalent of a reserve account. So I don't mean to, there may be some nuance to work out here amongst you, and happy to talk about it afterwards with you, but I believe the $2 would remain, and the school board would then make a decision on the spending of that. But that $2 would not be canceled, per pupil would not be canceled.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Representative Quam.
Thank you, Mr. Chair and members. Multiple times, the legislature has allowed several years to be able to implement mandates so they're not disruptive to the school districts, and they have been given flexibility multiple times between funds, especially when there have been tighter years. And I was involved with ZED which had several small school districts getting together, and that federal dollars were very constrained. Having state flexibility allowed us to realize students are individuals and they don't always fit into a single bucket. So the flexibility was very useful. Again, multiple times the legislature has done that. This talk about record funding, small rural districts around me, several have been in and out or approaching statutory operating debt. Those several districts, besides that, have also extra dollars from that wonderful budget, and when they added up the total extra cost for mandates, they exceeded the extra dollars, so they actually have been cutting millions of dollars from their budgets with all this extra money. One district, second lowest per pupil funded. I've got 3 districts that are in the bottom 6 per pupil funded, but this one's second lowest, but its ranges, instead of being less than 50%, are 62 to 71% on the MCAs. They're doing wonderful, but the mandates are so disruptive, there's a fear from that district and others that without having additional time, it'll disrupt the successful activities they're doing for their students and providing for them. So this bill is not something new, and it's not just a second time. Multiple times before, we've done things like this to allow districts to be able to make it through. And I'm sorry that it wasn't a direct question, but I thought historic activity by the legislature was prudent.
Thank you, Representative Clardy. Then Representative Lee.
Thank you, Chair Kresha, and this question is for Representative Bakeberg. My focus here is on the English language students. We know that that's one of the fastest growing populations in the state of Minnesota, and that the school districts are doing as much as they can based on the funds that they're getting from the state. However, how does allowing school districts to shift the funding from English language learners to elsewhere align with the state's responsibility to ensure that EL students receive a great education? And I think one of the earlier testifiers had mentioned that the proficiency rate of EL students is 9%. So I'm just trying to see how this would make sense to shift money out of that account with those vulnerable students.
Representative Bakeberg.
Thank you. I think it's a fantastic question to think about. EL students are our most vulnerable learners. I think those decisions, quite frankly, are made best at the local level. I can tell you in the school district that I serve, we are not able to hire full-time staff to be able to meet the needs of our EL students at the level that we would choose to with the funding that we have. So we are pulling, much like special ed, we're pulling and there's a cross subsidy. We've talked about that. But we need to allow our school districts the funding and the flexibility, and that's what this bill does, to be able to meet their local needs. We don't need to, at this table, be mandating how every single dollar is spent. And Superintendent Johnson, a 17 code, UFARS code, for those of you that don't know, that tells you specifically how every dollar is being spent. And we can pull it, and the state can pull it for every district and figure out how dollars are being spent. And we need to allow districts the flexibility to be able to respond to the needs, because specifically with our EL kids, what is happening today, right now across our school districts, we have students showing up and they don't speak English whatsoever. And do you know what our school districts do? Love those kids, serve those kids. Tuesday night, I was at a concert. I was sitting next to my wife, and my 6th grader was singing. There was a brand new to country Russian student. When she came three or 4 months ago, she didn't speak any English. And when I left that concert, she said, "Mr. Bakeberg, hi, great to see you." That's what our schools are doing. And that's what we can do when we trust our schools and we take the shackles off of them and let them serve our kids. That's what this bill is about, period.
And Representative Bakeberg, thank you. Members, we have about 5 minutes left, so I'm going to keep us rolling. Do you have a quick follow-up? Then
I do have a
Because the list is
follow-up.
trying to grow, and I'm going to cut us off at 25 after, so.
With us loving our students, again, back to the question of moving money and keeping local control, does it make sense to move money out of the EL account if students are not proficient and if they're not, if proficiency is the lowest level, does it make sense to even have the EL piece as a criteria to move money out of that fund?
Representative Bakeberg?
If the local district determines that it's not a good use of the funds, then the local district I trust to make the best decision for their community.
And members, all right, I have 6 people left, and
That's
I'm
fine.
going to cut us
That's
off
fine.
at 25 after. so.
There was an EL task force. One thing that was found is that there's school districts that don't have any teachers for their EL students. I just need to put that out there. And to me, that's not servicing the students.
Representative Lee.
Thank you, Chair. I think this is probably better for fiscal staff or Mr. Strom. There seems to be an implication that there isn't flexibility in the system for LEAs to come and ask for transfers. And so I'm just wondering if you can clarify the many ways in which LEAs can come and move funds from their nutrition account if they have a surplus for 3 years.
Nonpartisan staff.
Mr. Chair, Representative Lee, there are some funds that there are not transfers allowed out of. Essentially, nutrition is one of those that's very heavily limited by federal rule and the state law as well. For the general fund, unless money's in a reserve account or set aside in a different way, generally the board has authority to spend that money with flexibility. As you mentioned, there is a process in statute to request fund transfers. And if given the shortage of time, I'd be happy to put a little memo to the committee together about how that process works. There is this statutory fund transfer process, but food is unusual. Food and the debt service are the two funds that basically a district has great trouble moving money out of, even with legislative suggestions to do so.
Thank you. And I'm going to go to Representative Rayrauer.
Oh, can I ask?
No, I'm going to keep moving. I've got to get to the list.
I just want to say,
Representative Rayrauer.
that's why it's really important.
Representative
that we
Rayrauer,
pay for
you
what we
are
care about.
recognized.
Thank you, Chair. I just have a comment and a request, so I hope to be quick. I want to thank William Schwant, Teresa Greniger, and all our paraprofessionals and education support professionals. Your work is so very important to our students. Thank you. As a science teacher, I know you're the people providing that daily direct support for our most vulnerable students. The mandates, as they keep being referred to as, are really best practices. For example, requiring 8 hours of paid training for our paraprofessionals is really the very, very minimum they would need to be able to do their job and support our kids. As a teacher, I saw many paraprofessionals come in on the first day of school, walk around and quit and leave the building also on the first day of school. It's a big reason why we had such a shortage in this area. They would come in, show up to work day one, be handed a schedule, told to go to this classroom, this classroom, this classroom, support this student, that student, that student, didn't have time to read the student's IEP, didn't even know how to find the classroom. So these are the best practices that are just absolutely necessary for our kids. We know we need to provide more funding for our schools. That's not a question that's up for debate. So I request that we all work together to figure out a way to provide more funding, not take away best practices. Thank you.
Thank you, Representative Rayrauer. Representative Bennett, and then I'm going to go to Representative Perez Vega to close out. So you're off the list now?
I'm for the next one.
Okay.
I
Representative
just have to
Bennett?
raise my hand and make sure you see me over here for the next one.
Very good. Representative Bennett?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And actually, Representative Quam got at my first question, and I'll just ask my second question. And, I heard a lot of things about some valuable programs. We've got paid family leave, well, that hasn't even started yet. Districts haven't even been impacted by that financial bomb that's coming, but it's valuable. I will admit that to employees, and summer unemployment, valuable. All these other programs, I heard people say, don't allow transfers out of this fund or that fund. I get that. They're valuable things, but I do trust our local school boards and administrators and teachers who get to feed into that to be able to make those choices, good choices. The elephant in the room is this, and you hit it earlier, Superintendent. If we don't allow for things like this or give a huge amount of new funding to schools, you will be cutting paras, teachers, programs that hurt students.
It's not will be, I am.
Yes, you already are. And more is coming, right? So
Correct.
that's the elephant in the room. You know, paid family leave's nice, but we're not going to be there to enjoy that paid family leave if you're an educator or a para. And my question for us as legislators, I'm just going to throw it on, I'm not going to expect an answer here, Mr. Chair, is what are we going to do? We are facing a deficit, and it's getting worse. We just heard that today. We don't have the money to give schools a huge increase. Either that, or we're going to ask Minnesotans to ante up more. We've already asked them to increase their taxes by $10 billion. That happened over the last 2 years. Are we going to ask them to ante up more and pay more taxes? Or are we going to start allowing for creative things that temporarily allow flexibility and then give schools as much as they can? But we need to address the facts, and the fact is we're in a hard place as legislators and as schools, and we have to address it. But asking Minnesotans to ante up more in their tax dollars, when we went on as a legislature, a $18 billion spending spree over the last 2 years, that is not a responsible or even appropriate ask of our Minnesotans and our taxpayers. So we need to do our best for schools, and this is a creative bill to begin that. So thank you, Mr. Chair. I'll
Thank
leave
you,
my
Representative
question-
Bennett, and we are past the time, so Representative Bakeberg, you could close with a thank you or something as short as that.
I think Representative Bennett hit the nail on the head. We'll use that as my close.
Very good, and thank you to all the testifiers. Thank you, Mr. Uni, thanks you, Mr. Kirkblett. With that, we're going to bring up Representative Mueller. And so we'll be doing House File 877 as an informational meeting. The document for you will be Hotel 0877 Whiskey Echo 1, H0877WE1. Members, this bill refers to the READ Act. And I believe prioritizing science of reading, I'll editorialize and give you a little time, is one of the areas that we've had the most potential for good work together. And so while H77 has some fiscal implication, it is my hope that Representative Mueller, who already has started working with Representative Clardy and others, that we can continue to make that work together. And members, we're already looking at a budget. We're looking at some tough things. I think this is an opportunity. We might be able to move something standalone or separately with a lot of cooperation and work from many legislators. So I would like to bring that discussion to the Education Finance Committee. Representative Mueller, please present your bill.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I apologize. Before you brought me on, I decided to take a sip of water and it went down the wrong pipe. So thank you for a little bit of indulgence. I would encourage you to go ahead and take out the bill for today, which I have on just regular paper, which is 877 WE1. And I just want to very briefly go through, some of you are also in Ed Poly, and we went through this yesterday, so I'll do this as quickly as possible. The amendment that was adopted yesterday in education policy has been incorporated in this working engrossment number 1. So we're starting with a very strong statement of the science of reading, making sure that all of our instruction, interventions, instructional practices, teacher development, all of the curriculum is based on the science of reading. I did look at and listen to some of the things that were said about how we need to make sure that we need evidence-based rather than science of reading because of the fact that it is explicit, systematic, and includes phonological and phonemic awareness, phonics decoding, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. That is not taken out. That is on 2.1 through 2.5. So all of those definitions are still there. We are saying that this is the science of reading and only the science of reading. On page 2.9 through 2.17, that gives a more expanded definition. Added language that we added yesterday, 3.11, 3.14, 5. This talks about how we can approve professional development. We had heard from Minnesota Department of Education, or sorry, from the schools, that MDE and Cary had really restricted several of the professional development opportunities, and several of these places have been nationally accredited. And so we are saying here that if they are nationally accredited, there's no reason why they should be left off of the list. I'm going quickly, Mr. Chair, so I apologize. But on 4.15 through 4.30, that shows us severing the relationship with Cary and moving these duties to MDE. We had testimony, and I'm sure we'll hear it again from Mr. Uni, about how this would really strain the department with the because of needing to hire more FTEs and the expertise. I know that there are people there that are very knowledgeable in this area, and if not, I'm sure we could move some people around since there's hundreds of people working at MDE. If we look on page 6, this is added material, or added 6 and 7 is added from the amendment yesterday. This is talking about how we need more transparency and accountability on how we choose curriculum and how we do the teacher prep audit. I told the committee yesterday that I suffer from insomnia, and so at 2 o'clock in the morning, I was looking through a lot of things on MDE's website about the READ Act and finally unearthed the rubric on how to look at curriculum, and it was very difficult to understand, not because it was too hard for me to get, but because it was kind of a weird configuration. I tried to compare it with more third party, like the Reading League or EdPost, and their type of rubrics that they have, and there was several inconsistencies. We've already heard of people who have decided to drop out of the process because of inconsistencies and transparency that is not available. So this just is very clear in statute, a clear rubric that has to be published on the website, easy to find and easy to understand. All right, continuing on. And then on page 8 and 9, this is where we are looking at the culturally responsive language, and that only it has to be focused on the science of reading. You see in this engrossment that the cultural responsive language has actually been taken out. I said to policy yesterday that I'm working with Representative Jordan, Representative Clardy, Representative Green on how to come with a better definition of what that is. And as we have that conversation, I will tell you that, again, during my insomnia phase, I found what the department and Cary had pushed teachers and districts to use for culturally responsive curriculum. And rather than it being what we consider of a definition of making sure there's a wide representation of authors, making sure that we have a good representation of illustrations, making sure that we are having accurately depicted ethnic groups and all of those things, it brought me to this page right here, or this link, and this is highly charged political rhetoric and has frankly no business in kindergarten, first, second, and third grade. That's what we're talking about, the foundations of literacy, K through 3. And so knowing that differentiation and how important it is for kids to see themselves in what they learn, I am hoping that we're going to be able to come to a consensus with a good definition of what cultural responsive is. And then finally, we are looking at on page 11, so 11.4 through 11.6. This talks about the test that we are asking Tier 3 and Tier 4 teachers to pass. I will tell you, members, that people who are, other states who are doing reading initiatives, especially really strong pushes in reading, they are doubling down on reading endorsements and making sure that their teachers don't have to be retrained. And so I heard a lot from education policy about how this is a mental health strain on our teachers. It's also a mental health strain on our teachers when they're not trained to do the job that they were asked to do. And that's what we're hearing from some of our teachers, is that they simply were not trained from some of the teacher prep programs that they are taught in the science of reading. And they're struggling trying to figure out what to do next. And that's also a mental strain. That also deals with teacher burnout. So now I would ask you, if you look on on line 11.
Mr. Chair?
5.
No, I'm so sorry, Representative Mueller. Mr. Chair, since we don't have this bill in our possession and you had wanted a discussion, could we, I'm very thankful to nonpartisan staff for the unofficial engrossment. Could we get to questions soon?
Madam Chair, I'm going to let her finish testimony, and then we'll
This
go
is
from there.
literally my last one.
Representative
Thank you,
Mueller, please
Joachim.
continue.
I would tell you that on page 11.5, if you do look, it says to pass an examination or perform an assessment of knowledge. So if you would highlight, circle any of those things, this does not have to be a paper pencil test. This could be a practical exam. This could be hands-on examination. This could be a portfolio. This could be whatever that looks like. And I'm still working on language with Representative Clardy, Representative Jordan, and some other stakeholders with that. I will tell you that, again, in other states, we are the outliers by taking this away, having an endorsement. We are the outliers in that. Mississippi, where we've seen the greatest growth of literacy, they have a 4-hour paper pencil exam that they make their teachers take. I'm not asking that. Here's the extreme on one end. We're the extreme on the other by taking it away. I'm sure we can find some common ground in the middle. And that's really it. The appropriations that were given to Cary would then go back to the schools, and we would make sure that we would have a chance for them to use that money for what they need to make the implementation work. So with that, Chair Kresha and Lead Joachim, I'd be open to some questions.
And with that, we do have one testifier, and then we'll go to, starting with Representative Perez-Vega. But the first testifier we have is Jesus Ramirez, the only testifier I have. So if you want to come up and give your testimony, and then we'll go to questions. And I'm not seeing, okay. In light of that,
Sorry,
Representative.
Mr. Chair, I thought Mr. Uni was supposed to come up.
Yeah, I'm going to
Great.
go to questions.
Good.
So
Thank you.
Representative Perez-Vega, you get to lead us off.
Thank you. Oh, so there's no Jesus?
You're up, Representative
All right, I
Perez-Vega.
just want to make sure. I held a conversation in my district actually last Saturday to talk with leaders of dual immersion programming and the impact that we have to address in not slicing the READ Act in Phase 2, but improving it. I heard a lot that good work and changes done right when it's through cultural competency and inclusion of educators, students, and parents, and the environment of our community overall. And I just want to note that these weren't just educators that are within my school districts of St. Paul and West St. Paul, but that there were inclusion throughout the entire state. And I found that in particularly when we talk about a community that works together from the parent, the students, to the educators, is what creates the best learner. And we all want what's best for our kids, and it's important to address that there's different ways each child learns, all right? And one of the needs I highlighted here that we should all agree on is that communication is key, and understanding and being respectful to build together to ensure Minnesota children excel in literacy is the mission. There's always rooms, Representative, for improvement, okay? I heard that from you, and I agree, and I think all of us can agree. That's why we're here, changing, implementing. And our kids and educators of dual immersion programs connect through cultural engagement and literacy. And I have gearing into my question, as somebody that came from a dual immersion background, I learned my letters in Spanish from my grandmother, who was my child's care provider, and my numbers in Spanish. And there's dialects and differences amongst other kids who speak the same language of origin of Spanish that's rooted in Latin. But there's different cultural connections as to how I was able to adapt into learning those letters in preschool in English. And so, I have a question that's leading up to it, Kresha, because I know, Representative, you're probably like, where's your question?
You have the floor.
What makes you think, okay, were you born in Minnesota?
Yes.
So was I. St. Louis Park, shout out to shout out to SLP. Everybody thinks I was born in STP, but I was born in SLP. My mom drove all the way from the west side to give birth and was probably speaking a lot of Spanglish on her way in labor. What makes you think that that little girl that my mom had who went to a all-English curriculum felt a deep-rooted celebration connection when all of the books that were a part of the curriculum did not include the stories or the visuals or even the dialects of when we were celebrating dual immersion in those times to implement into Heritage Months, made me feel like I wasn't isolated in the classroom and helped improve my literacy. It literally detached me, and these are the stories that I heard from Dr. Steve Elise, who is the principal as well, that could compare it at Riverview Dual Immersion. These are the stories of the executive directors and the directors and the principals from the charter schools of Academia de la Paz, whether it is Katie Avina at El Colegio on the south side, or Dr. Miss Norma Garces, who I call a doctor of education, even though she doesn't have that, because she is the one who enforced us to continue to not go out and provided books from Mexico so that we could learn about our classmates around us, because I'm not Mexican. You know, the implementations of Japanese literacy that the aunties who own the businesses in our community brought there. So asking you as from one Minnesotan
And I will
to
ask
another Minnesotan,
Representative
why do
Vega,
you
let's
think
go through
that
the chair.
cultural literacy and cultural curriculum deserves to be taken away from progressing all of our Minnesota children?
So, Representative Mueller, from Representative Perez Vega, you.
Thank you, and thank you. Thank you for the question. And I don't believe it deserves to be taken out. I'm saying that the way that it was defined by Carrie and MDE is not helpful for people to learn literacy. Hang on, before you respond.
And Representative Perez Vega and Representative Mueller, let's go through the chair, please, so we can get through this.
Because I think that this conversation is that we agree a lot more than what you're thinking. A teacher has great latitude on how they're able to connect with their students. What MDE and Carrie were pushing is not what you're talking about. And so when we are looking at how to teach the foundations of learning to read, which FYI, when you don't know how to read, that's also isolating, also harmful, also makes you detached from the rest of your peers. But when you don't know how to read, when we are teaching students how to read, then you're actually able then, as they continue to learn these elements, to infuse all those different cultural elements in there so that they can read them. And I will have you say, this was an informational hearing, so Mr. Chair, I did not provide this for the committee, and when we have the bill in front of us, I will make sure to provide this. This is from Ed Allies, and Ed, I got a chance to really go to this. I got to go to Monroe, and this is where this is from. Monroe is one of those schools that serves a very diverse population and has EL students, special education students. They use a curriculum, Bridges to Read, that's based on the science of reading. And they do as much as they can to include as much of the representation as they can, but their goal is to teach them how to read. This here shows it includes all English learners and all special education students, and it broke it up into their ethnicities. Every single one of them now has a proficiency in reading of over 80 to 90%. And so, again, the goal is to teach reading. And as the teacher continues to add more to connect with their students, in order to do that, you have to still have the foundation of learning to read. And so that's why I'm working so hard to come up with a definition that will accomplish what you're asking, Representative Perez Vega, but is not actually pushing out curriculum that would have been highly recognized as something that's following the science of reading. And that's what's happening. We have people saying here that curriculum is being excluded, high level of curriculum, simply because it doesn't follow this, not what you're saying. And Representative Green and I have talked, this doesn't have to be mutually exclusive. Teaching how to read and being culturally inclusive is not mutually inclusive or mutually exclusive, but they need to have the foundation of learning to read before they're even able to have some of those things added into there. And there's lots of the curriculum now, as people are trying to sell textbooks, that are also in Spanish and also in different languages so that we can meet some of those needs and then move them into English. So
And Representative
I
Mueller,
will
I'm sorry.
tell you that this is something that we're able to, I think we're going to be able to come to a consensus.
And I'm not tempering you, I'm holding your passion because I want to make sure Representative Perez Vega has a follow-up so we can keep this going. Representative Perez Vega, you are recognized.
Appreciate that, Chair Kresha. You know, when you say we're not trying to take out, you are trying to take out the connections that adapt the student to feel even comfortability to engage into a science of reading. If you're trying to say that that's not what this bill is, we can take it offline because I want to be respectful to my other colleagues that have questions with this.
Representative Perez Vega, you'll be the last one, so go ahead.
Okay, you know, we're talking about here within the determining the curriculum and intervention materials that are evidence-based. I would like to implement that these folks that came to conversate with me, you're right. Not all of are in agreement of what's been happening. We're trying to set the improvements, but what we all came to agree that is not being credited here is the impact of equity. The impact of not the English to learn Spanish student, but the Spanish to learn English student, the Korean language to learn English student. It's very black and white on both sides, which I want to help the READ Act. And I think that the READ Act is a step of an advantage of a historical implementation and a mandate of law here at the state of Minnesota. Is it perfect? Absolutely not perfect. But for us to be able to say we're going to dissect this and make this change, that's a mandate fighting another mandate here. We need to get it on board. So like I stated, you know, I've been speaking for about 3 weeks in particularly with dual immersion programming on this because it's not right. But what's not right is taking out the connections of the culture that gets the kid comfortable in the classroom. And also what's not right is hearing from the experts themselves, and I'm not talking about Carrie, and I'm not talking about the U of M, I'm talking about the folks that are on the front lines that have been doing this work for over 3 decades. And so I just want to say, I like to continue the conversation on it, but I don't believe that HF 877 is moving in a direction pa'lante, moving forward. I think it's freezing the minds of these children, whether they're in kindergarten like my daughter or in 8th grade that are way behind to be able to get progressive here in the state of Minnesota's education programming. Thank you.
So Representative Mueller, there's your opening for an opportunity and collaboration and quick close, and then we'll be out of time.
Well, I really appreciate the conversation. I know it's not done. I'm glad that we're able to have this open dialogue. I will say this. I've been in the classroom for over 20 years. This isn't something that I just came up out of nowhere and said, oh, I think I should change it this way. I actually have a doctorate in education with an emphasis in literacy. I actually do have some credibility when it comes to this subject. And I live in a district where the kindergartners are 80% non-white. So I'm not coming from rural Minnesota where I'm teaching everyone who looks like me. And the people who come and talk to me ask that their students know how to read. That's what they're asking. If we want to talk about equity, I can't imagine something that offers more equity than learning how to read. If we want to talk about giving them generational change, I can't imagine anything more generational changing than learning how to read. And the things that were pushed by MDE and Carrie stand in the way of that goal. And the things that we're asking our teachers to do are things that they're already doing by connecting with their students. And so that's why I want to be able to make sure that it's reflecting what they're doing in the classroom and not preventing them from doing what they need to do and not preventing them from actually being able to stand by the science of reading. And so I look forward to the conversation, and thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Representative Mueller. Thank you for the passion. To all the members. Members, that concludes our agenda for today. Our next meeting will be Tuesday, March 11th. Today, we saw the MMB forecast, and next week, we'll get an update from our nonpartisan staff, and we'll begin looking at compensatory revenue and specific bills around that. So with that, the committee stands adjourned.